On that grey morning, the rain already covered everything with a thick mud and endless water. Amid sirens and alleys, a mounted policeman advances through the flooded streets looking for stranded residents. Behind him, his patrol horse keeps a steady pace amidst the chaos. A gush of water bursts a manhole cover, and in seconds, the current swallows the policeman. The horse stops, breathes, and stays there. In the distance, residents huddle on the sidewalks. Some filming, others shouting. Without a command, the animal dives in the direction of its unconscious partner. And for a second, everything stopped. Love animal stories. Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now, back to our story. That morning began with an overcast sky that showed no signs of mercy. Detective Jake Morrison had seen his fair share of unpredictable weather in Louisville, Kentucky. But something about this particular Tuesday felt different. The air hung heavy with anticipation, thick and humid, in a way that made his uniform stick uncomfortably to his skin as he adjusted the reins of Thunder, his loyal mounted patrol horse. The first drops fell discreetly on Main Street, barely noticeable against the morning bustle of downtown Louisville. Coffee shop patrons hurried past with their morning brews, office workers clutched their briefcases a little tighter, and the usual rhythm of city life continued, uninterrupted. But within minutes, those innocent droplets transformed into something far more menacing. Thunder snorted nervously, his ears twitching at the sudden change in atmospheric pressure. Jake had learned to trust his horse's instincts over his 5 years in the mounted patrol unit. The bay gelding had an uncanny ability to sense danger before humans could even comprehend it was approaching. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, patting Thunder's neck as the rain began to intensify. The gentle patter on the pavement quickly escalated into a steady drumbeat, then into a torrential downpour that seemed to come from all directions at once. Within 30 minutes, the scene transformed dramatically. What started as a typical morning commute in the Bluegrass State's largest city became a chaotic emergency situation. The rain descended with relentless fury, turning familiar streets into rushing rivers and forcing the entire downtown area into a state of high alert. Emergency sirens began wailing across the city as the Louisville Metro Police Department's dispatch crackled with urgent calls. Reports flooded in from every district, water rising in the highlands, flooding in old Louisville's historic mansions, and families trapped in the lower-lying areas near the Ohio River. Jake watched from his elevated position as people emerged from buildings, some attempting to protect their storefronts with sandbags, others seeking higher ground as the water level rose with alarming speed. The constant sound of water cascading down sidewalks mixed with the symphony of emergency vehicles, creating an atmosphere of controlled chaos that tested everyone's preparedness. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez stood at the window of her second-floor apartment on Bardstown Road, watching the drama unfold below. As a longtime resident of the Highlands neighborhood, she had witnessed her share of severe weather, but nothing quite like this. Her weathered hands gripped the windowsill as she watched Jake and Thunder navigate the increasingly treacherous streets. "Watch, Carlos," she called to her teenage grandson, who was glued to his phone in the corner. "Look at that brave officer and his horse down there." Carlos looked up reluctantly from his social media feed, but found himself captivated by the sight of the mounted patrol officer moving purposefully through the rising waters. At 17, he had developed a cynical view of authority figures, influenced by his participation in local community organizing groups. But something about the partnership between man and horse struck him as different. Meanwhile, across town in the Smoketown neighborhood, community leader Marcus Washington was receiving urgent phone calls from residents whose homes were beginning to flood. As president of the Neighborhood Action Coalition, Marcus had long been a vocal critic of what he saw as the police department's misallocation of resources, particularly the mounted patrol unit. One, we're spending taxpayer money on horses while our drainage system fails, he had argued countless times at city council meetings. These animals have no place in modern emergency response. Now, as reports came in about the mounted patrol being deployed to assist with flood rescues, Marcus saw an opportunity to prove his point. He grabbed his raincoat and headed out into the storm, determined to document what he was certain would be an example of poor resource management in action. The Louisville Metropolitan Emergency Management Agency had activated its crisis protocols, but the speed and severity of the flooding caught everyone off guard. Chief of Police Sarah Bennett stood in the command center, coordinating response efforts across the city while monitoring weather reports that continued to worsen. "Get all available units to the low-lying areas," she ordered, "and deploy the mounted patrol to zones where vehicles can't access." The decision to use mounted officers in flood situations wasn't taken lightly. Chief Bennett knew that horses could navigate terrain and water depths that would disable patrol cars, but she also understood the controversy surrounding the program. Budget meetings had grown contentious over the past year, with critics questioning the expense and practicality of maintaining a mounted unit in the 21st century. Thunder's hooves created small splashes as Jake guided him down 4th Street, where water was beginning to rise around the wheels of abandoned cars. The horse moved with confidence and purpose, his training evident in every step. Jake scanned the area for residents who might need assistance, his radio crackling with updates from other units across the city. "Unit 12 to Central." Jake's voice cut through the static. "We have elderly residents stranded at the Maple Apartments on Oak Street, requesting backup, but vehicle access is compromised." "Copy that, Unit 12. Rescue units are en route, but ETA is unknown due to flooding on main arteries." As they approached the apartment complex, Jake could see faces pressed against windows on the upper floors. An elderly man waved frantically from a 2nd-story balcony, pointing toward the building's lower level, where water was seeping through doorways. Thunder waded through water that was now reaching the bottom of Jake's boots. The horse remained steady and calm, his years of training with the mounted patrol evident in his composed demeanor despite the chaotic surroundings. Jake had often marveled at the intelligence and reliability of his 4-legged partner, though he knew not everyone shared his appreciation for the mounted unit's capabilities. As they reached the apartment building, Jake noticed a small crowd gathering on higher ground nearby. Among them, he spotted Marcus Washington, who was speaking animatedly to other residents while gesturing toward Jake and Thunder. Even from a distance, Jake could sense the tension in Marcus's body language and suspected he was facing criticism about the department's response methods. The water continued to rise, and Jake realized they were racing against time. Radio chatter indicated that this wasn't just a typical Louisville thunderstorm, but potentially one of the most severe flooding events the city had experienced in decades. The National Weather Service had issued flash flood warnings extending through the afternoon, with no sign of the rain subsiding. Thunder shifted nervously as debris began floating past them. Pieces of lumber, trash cans, and other items swept up by the increasing current. Jake made mental calculations about safe routes and evacuation priorities, knowing that every decision in the next few hours could mean the difference between successful rescues and potential tragedy. The elderly residents were still calling for help from their windows, and Jake knew he had to act quickly. But as he prepared to dismount and assess the situation more closely, an ominous rumbling sound echoed from somewhere beneath the flooded street. Thunder's ears perked up immediately, and the horse took several steps backward, as if sensing something that human ears couldn't yet detect. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, trusting his horse's instincts completely. The rumbling grew louder, and other people in the area began to notice the sound as well. Mrs. Rodriguez, still watching from her apartment window several blocks away, felt a chill run down her spine. as she noticed the water patterns beginning to change in the street below. The morning that had started with simple rain clouds was evolving into something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. And Jake Morrison was about to face the greatest challenge of his career in the mounted patrol. The rumbling sound that had caught Thunder's attention suddenly exploded into a deafening crash that reverberated through the flooded streets of downtown Louisville. What happened next would change everything for everyone watching. A manhole cover, weakened by the enormous pressure of rushing water beneath the street, erupted from the asphalt with tremendous force. The explosion sent a geyser of muddy water 30 feet into the air, and in an instant, the relatively manageable flood situation transformed into something far more treacherous. Jake felt Thunder rear back instinctively as the street beneath them literally burst open. The sudden rush of water from the city's overwhelmed storm drainage system created an aggressive current that turned Oak Street into a raging river. What had been ankle-deep standing water moments before was now a torrent flowing with dangerous speed toward the Ohio River. "Holy," Jake began. But his words were cut short as Thunder struggled to maintain footing on the increasingly unstable ground. The horse's training kicked in, and he attempted to back away from the newly created hazard. But the current was already pulling everything in its path toward the lower elevations of the city. Marcus Washington, who had been documenting what he intended to use as evidence of poor resource allocation, found himself witnessing something entirely different. His smartphone, which had been recording video for his social media campaign against the mounted patrol, captured the exact moment when the street exploded and everything changed. "Did everyone see that?" Marcus shouted to the crowd that had gathered on the elevated sidewalk near the Highlands. "This is exactly why we shouldn't have officers on horses in dangerous situations like this." But even as he spoke, Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. The situation had escalated beyond his prepared talking points about budget priorities and modern policing methods. This was real danger unfolding in real time, and despite his political convictions, he couldn't help but worry about the safety of both the officer and the animal. Thunder fought valiantly against the sudden current, his powerful legs working to keep both himself and Jake safe. The horse's nostrils flared with exertion as he navigated around floating debris, a plastic storage container, several traffic cones, and what appeared to be a park bench that had been swept up in the torrent. Dr. Amanda Foster, a veterinarian who ran a practice specializing in large animals just outside the city, happened to be in downtown Louisville for a supply run when the flooding began. She had taken shelter in a coffee shop and was now watching the drama unfold through the large front windows. As someone who had worked with police horses for training and medical care, she immediately recognized the exceptional skill being demonstrated by both horse and rider. "That horse is incredibly well trained," she murmured to herself, pulling out her phone to call the police department. If this situation deteriorated further, they might need specialized assistance with large animal rescue, something she had unfortunately experienced during previous flood emergencies in rural Kentucky. The current continued to intensify, fed by the broken drainage system that was now disgorging thousands of gallons of water per minute directly onto the street. Jake tried to guide Thunder toward higher ground near the Jefferson County Courthouse, but the horse was struggling against the powerful flow. Carlos Rodriguez had abandoned his cynical teenage attitude entirely as he watched from his grandmother's apartment window. "Grandmother, look how hard they're trying," he said, his voice filled with concern rather than his usual dismissive tone toward authority figures. Mrs. Rodriguez crossed herself and began murmuring a prayer in Spanish, though she quickly corrected herself to English when she remembered her grandson's preference. "Oh, please let them be safe," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the scene below. The crowd that had gathered was growing larger as word spread through social media and emergency communications. People emerged from buildings despite the danger, drawn by the dramatic scene unfolding in their neighborhood. Many pulled out phones to document the event, though the driving rain made visibility difficult. Fire Captain Michael O'Brien arrived with Engine Company 7, but immediately recognized the limitations of their equipment in this particular situation. Their truck couldn't navigate the deep, fast-moving water, and their standard rescue protocols weren't designed for the unique challenges presented by a mounted officer in distress. "We need specialized equipment down here," he radioed back to headquarters, "and possibly large animal rescue resources." Dr. Foster overheard the radio transmission from her position in the coffee shop and made a quick decision. She approached Captain O'Brien as he stood assessing the situation from the relative safety of higher ground. "Captain, I'm Dr. Amanda Foster, veterinarian. I have experience with large animal emergency situations if you need assistance." "Doc, right now we need all the help we can get," O'Brien replied, gratitude evident in his voice. What can you tell us about horse behavior in situations like this?" As if responding to their conversation, Thunder suddenly stumbled. The force of the current, combined with a large piece of debris, what looked like a wooden pallet from a construction site, struck the horse's side with considerable force. Jake felt his partner falter and immediately tried to reassure the animal while scanning for safer ground. "There's good news and bad news about horses in water," Dr. Foster explained quickly to Captain O'Brien. "The good news is they're naturally strong swimmers with excellent survival instincts. The bad news is they can panic if they feel trapped or if their rider is in distress." The situation was becoming more precarious by the minute. The water level had risen to Thunder's belly, and the current was strong enough to move cars. Jake could see that several vehicles had already been pushed against buildings or carried towards storm drains. Marcus Washington found his prepared criticism dying in his throat as he watched the reality of the situation unfold. This wasn't about budget priorities anymore. It was about human and animal lives in immediate danger. The community leader who had spent months arguing against the mounted patrol program was beginning to understand that his theoretical objections were colliding with practical emergency response needs. "Maybe they should try to get to the courthouse steps," suggested Jennifer Mitchell, a local business owner who had joined the growing crowd of observers. "It's higher ground, and there's more room for rescue equipment." But even as she spoke, another ominous sound emerged from beneath the flooded street. The storm drainage system, never designed to handle this volume of water, was reaching its breaking point. Additional manholes throughout the area were beginning to show signs of stress, with water bubbling up around their edges like miniature geysers. Thunder seemed to sense the increasing danger before anyone else. The horse's behavior changed subtly. His ears moved constantly, monitoring sounds that humans couldn't detect, and his gait became more cautious and deliberate. Jake felt the shift in his partner's demeanor and increased his own vigilance accordingly. The crowd, watching from safety, was growing more anxious by the minute. What had started as curious observation was becoming collective concern for the welfare of both the officer and his horse. Even those who had never paid attention to the mounted patrol before found themselves emotionally invested in the outcome of this emergency situation. Dr. Foster continued her explanation to Captain O'Brien, but her attention was divided between the professional consultation and her growing worry about the animals and humans still caught in the dangerous conditions. Her years of experience with horses told her that the situation was reaching a critical point where instinct and training would determine the outcome. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and meteorologists on emergency radio channels were reporting that this storm system was larger and more intense than their models had predicted. Flash flood warnings had been extended through the evening, with some areas expected to receive record-breaking rainfall totals. As Jake attempted to navigate Thunder toward the courthouse, he noticed that the water was no longer just rising. It was moving with increasing speed and force. Debris was flowing past them more frequently now, and some pieces were large enough to pose serious threats to both horse and rider. Thunder whinnied nervously, and Jake could feel the tension building in his partner's muscles. The horse was working harder now, fighting not just against the water depth but against a current that was becoming more aggressive with each passing minute. The crowd had grown to include residents from several blocks around, many of whom had evacuated their lower-level homes and businesses. Among them were people who had never agreed on anything before: conservative business owners, progressive activists, elderly long-time residents, and young families, all united in their concern for the safety of the officer and horse who were risking their lives to help others. But the unity was fragile. Marcus Washington, despite his growing personal concern, felt pressure from his position as a community leader to maintain his stance against what he saw as an outdated and dangerous police practice. His phone was buzzing with messages from supporters who expected him to use this situation as evidence for his arguments. "This is exactly what we've been warning about," he said to the crowd, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Putting animals in harm's way for situations that modern equipment should handle." However, his criticism was met with unexpected resistance from the very community members who had previously supported his position. The immediate reality of the emergency situation was creating new perspectives that transcended previous political positions. The storm continued to intensify, and Jake realized they were no longer dealing with a routine emergency response. The broken drainage system had turned downtown Louisville into something resembling a disaster movie set, with rising water, dangerous currents, and increasing urgency for everyone involved. Thunder's breathing had become more labored as he fought against the current, and Jake could feel his partner's strength being tested in ways that their training exercises had never replicated. The bond between police horse and officer, forged through months of partnership and trust, was about to face its ultimate test. As the water reached a critical depth, Jake made a decision that would set in motion a series of events that no one, not the critics, not the supporters, not the emergency responders, could have anticipated. The decision Jake Morrison made would haunt him for the rest of his life, not because it was wrong, but because of what it would cost him in the next 30 seconds. Seeing an elderly woman frantically waving from a first-floor window of the apartment building, partially submerged but still accessible, Jake made the choice that any dedicated officer would make. He dismounted Thunder to attempt a closer rescue approach, believing he could reach the woman and return to his horse before the situation became more dangerous. It was a calculated risk based on years of experience, but Mother Nature had her own calculations. "I'm going to help that woman," Jake called out to Captain O'Brien, who was coordinating rescue efforts from higher ground. "Keep an eye on Thunder for me." Thunder whinnied nervously as Jake waded toward the building, the water now reaching the officer's chest. The current was stronger than Jake had anticipated, and each step required enormous effort to maintain balance against the rushing water. Dr. Amanda Foster watched with growing alarm from her position near the fire truck. Her knowledge of horse behavior told her that Thunder was displaying signs of severe anxiety about being separated from his rider. The horse was pacing as much as the current would allow, his head raised high and ears constantly moving to track Jake's position. "That horse is not comfortable with this separation," she informed Captain O'Brien urgently. "In a crisis situation, police horses are trained to stay with their officers. Fighting that instinct is causing him stress." Jake reached the apartment building and managed to help the elderly woman climb through her window to a small ledge where she would be safer until proper rescue equipment could reach her. But as he turned to wade back to Thunder, the inevitable happened: another manhole cover, weakened by the same underground pressure that had caused the first explosion. gave way with a tremendous crash just 20 feet upstream from where Jake stood. The resulting surge of water created a current so powerful that it swept Jake off his feet before he could react. The crowd watching from safety let out a collective gasp as they witnessed Officer Jake Morrison disappear beneath the muddy, churning water. Cell phone cameras captured the moment, but the driving rain and murky water made it impossible to see exactly what was happening below the surface. "Officer down! Officer down!" Captain O'Brien shouted into his radio. "We need water rescue units at Oak and Fourth immediately." But even as emergency protocols kicked into action, everyone knew that traditional rescue equipment would take precious minutes to arrive and deploy. Minutes that Jake Morrison might not have, as the powerful current carried him away from safety and toward the storm drainage system that led to the Ohio River. Thunder's reaction was instantaneous and unprecedented. The well-trained police horse, who had spent years learning to follow commands and wait patiently for his rider's return, made a decision that defied everything in his training manual. Without hesitation, without a command, without any human guidance whatsoever, Thunder plunged into the dangerous current after his partner, Marcus Washington, who had been preparing another criticism about the recklessness of using horses in emergency situations, found his words dying in his throat as he witnessed something that challenged every assumption he had made about the mounted patrol program. "Did that horse just—" he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "He went after his officer," Dr. Foster said, her voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. "I've never seen anything like this. Police horses are trained for crowd control, ceremony, and patrol work. They're not trained for water rescue, but that animal just made an independent decision to risk his life." Carlos Rodriguez pressed his face against his grandmother's apartment window, his teenage cynicism completely forgotten. "Abuela, are you seeing this? The horse is trying to save the police officer." Mrs. Rodriguez was indeed seeing it, and through her tears, she was witnessing something that transcended politics, budgets, and community debates. This was about loyalty, courage, and the bond between partners who had spent years building trust and dependence on each other. The current was carrying both Jake and Thunder downstream, but the horse was fighting against the flow with a determination that amazed everyone watching. Thunder's powerful legs worked frantically as he navigated around debris, chunks of concrete, fallen tree branches, and pieces of metal siding that had been torn from buildings by the force of the water. "Can horses actually swim in conditions like this?" Jennifer Mitchell asked Dr. Foster, her business owner's pragmatism warring with her emotional investment in the rescue attempt. "Horses are naturally good swimmers," Dr. Foster replied, her eyes never leaving the dramatic scene unfolding in the flooded street. "But this isn't swimming, this is combat. That horse is fighting for his life and his partner's life simultaneously." Fire and rescue units were arriving from across Jefferson County, but the scope of the flooding was limiting their effectiveness. Boat launches were compromised, streets were impassable for heavy vehicles, and the electrical hazards from downed power lines made water rescues even more dangerous than usual. Chief of Police Sarah Bennett arrived on scene and immediately grasped the unprecedented nature of the situation. In her 25 years of law enforcement, she had never encountered anything like a police horse conducting an independent rescue operation. "What's the status on our officer?" she asked Captain O'Brien. "Lost visual contact approximately 3 minutes ago," he replied grimly. "The horse went in after him, but conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Water levels are still rising, and we've had multiple infrastructure failures throughout the downtown area." Chief Bennett surveyed the scene with the calculating mind of a career law enforcement officer. But what she saw challenged every protocol and procedure she had ever learned. Traditional rescue operations were being rendered impossible by the conditions, while an animal was attempting something that defied both training and logic. Thunder's head bobbed above the surface as he fought to keep both himself and Jake, who remained unconsciously limp in the current, from being swept into the storm drainage system. The horse's nostrils flared with exertion, and foam from his efforts mixed with the muddy floodwater. The crowd of observers had grown to include residents from throughout the Highlands neighborhood, despite the dangerous conditions. People who had evacuated their homes found themselves drawn to witness what was becoming an extraordinary demonstration of animal intelligence and loyalty. Marcus Washington faced a crisis of conviction as profound as the weather crisis unfolding in the streets. His months of advocating against the mounted patrol program were based on logical arguments about resource allocation and modern efficiency. But logic had little to offer when confronted with the sight of a horse risking everything to save his human partner. "I don't understand what I'm seeing," he admitted quietly to the people around him. "Animals aren't supposed to think like this." "Maybe that's what we've been getting wrong," replied Sarah Thompson, a school teacher who had previously supported Marcus's position. "Maybe we've been thinking about this program in terms of equipment and budget lines, when we should have been thinking about partnerships and relationships." Dr. Foster was providing running commentary to Captain O'Brien about Thunder's condition and capabilities, but even her professional expertise was being challenged by the horse's performance. "Horses have strong survival instincts," she explained. But what we're seeing goes beyond self-preservation. This animal is actively choosing to put himself in greater danger to help his partner. That's not instinct, that's decision-making." The water continued to rise, and additional manholes throughout downtown Louisville were beginning to fail under pressure. The storm drainage system, designed for normal rainfall, was completely overwhelmed by the unprecedented volume of water. Emergency management officials were comparing the situation to historic floods from decades past. Thunder's struggle against the current was becoming more desperate with each passing minute. The horse was tiring, but his determination remained unwavering. Jake's unconscious form made the rescue exponentially more difficult, as Thunder had to support his partner's weight while navigating the dangerous debris field that the floodwaters had created. Is there any way we can help them?" Carlos asked his grandmother, his voice cracking with emotion. Mrs. Rodriguez had lived through enough hardships in her 73 years to understand when situations were beyond human control. "We pray, mijo," she said softly, "and we hope that the bond between them is strong enough." The crowd, watching from the elevated sidewalks and building windows, had grown silent except for occasional gasps and murmurs of encouragement. Cell phone videos were being shared across social media platforms, and news crews were beginning to arrive despite the hazardous driving conditions. Chief Bennett made contact with specialized rescue units throughout Kentucky and southern Indiana, but the weather conditions were hampering response times. This was becoming a situation where traditional emergency response protocols were inadequate, and the outcome would depend on factors beyond human control. Thunder's breathing was becoming labored, but the horse continued his desperate struggle against the current. His eyes rolled with exertion and fear, but he never stopped fighting to keep both himself and Jake above the surface of the increasingly turbulent water. Marcus Washington found himself in an impossible position. His political convictions demanded that he maintain criticism of a program that put animals and officers in such danger. But his humanity was responding to the extraordinary courage being displayed by both the horse and the officer who had risked his life to help a trapped resident. The community leader, who had spent months arguing that horses had no place in modern emergency response, was watching a horse conduct emergency response operations that were beyond the capability of any mechanical equipment currently available to the Louisville Metro Police Department. Dr. Foster's professional assessment was becoming increasingly grim. "That horse is reaching the limits of his endurance," she warned Captain O'Brien, "and the current is carrying them toward the main drainage outlet. If they get pulled into that system, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood that the storm drainage system, designed to channel water rapidly toward the Ohio River, would be impossible to survive for both horse and human. Thunder seemed to understand the geography as well as the humans watching him. The horse's efforts became more frantic as he approached the area where Oak Street's drainage system connected to the main collection point. This was where his partnership with Jake Morrison, forged through years of trust and mutual dependence, would face its ultimate test. The crowd held its breath as they realized they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after the floodwaters receded. A story of loyalty, courage, and the extraordinary bonds that can develop between species when they work together toward common goals. Thunder's battle against the raging current had evolved into something that transcended the physical realm. Every muscle in the horse's powerful body was working beyond its normal capacity, fueled by something deeper than training or instinct, something that could only be called love. The crowd gathered on higher ground had grown to include hundreds of Louisville residents, despite the continuing downpour and dangerous conditions. Word of the dramatic rescue attempt had spread through social media, emergency radio channels, and the kind of neighborhood communication network that still existed in tight-knit communities. Mrs. Rodriguez found herself surrounded by neighbors she had barely spoken to in years. The elderly Italian-American woman from the apartment next door stood beside her, both clutching rosaries and whispering prayers in their respective languages. Language barriers seemed irrelevant when faced with the universal language of courage being demonstrated in the flooded street below. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, said Robert Chen, owner of the corner grocery store. "Udra and I never believed in miracles. But if that horse saves that officer..." He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. What they were witnessing was challenging assumptions about the nature of intelligence, loyalty, and heroism that extended far beyond their previous debates about police budgets and resource allocation. Thunder's head disappeared beneath the surface for several terrifying seconds as a large piece of debris, what appeared to be part of a construction barrier, struck him from the side. The collective intake of breath from the watching crowd was audible even over the sound of rushing water and emergency sirens. Dr. Amanda Foster gripped Captain O'Brien's arm. "He's exhausted," she said urgently. "Horses can only maintain this level of exertion for so long. Their cardiovascular systems aren't designed for prolonged extreme stress like this." But even as she spoke, Thunder's head emerged again, still supporting Jake's unconscious form. The horse's eyes showed the kind of determination that couldn't be measured by veterinary science or explained by animal behavior textbooks. Marcus Washington stood in the crowd, his smartphone no longer recording for his social media campaign. The community leader who had built his reputation on logical arguments and practical solutions found himself confronting something that existed outside the realm of logic and practicality. "This changes things," he said quietly to Jennifer Mitchell, who had joined the group of observers. "Changes what?" she asked, her business owner's mind still processing the implications of what they were witnessing. "Everything," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible over the sound of rushing water. "How do you argue against a program that produces this kind of partnership?" The question hung in the air like the storm clouds overhead, challenging not just Marcus's political position, but the entire framework through which the community had been viewing the mounted patrol debate. Carlos Rodriguez had abandoned his position at his grandmother's window and ventured down to street level, despite her protests. At 17, he possessed the kind of fearless curiosity that made adults simultaneously admired and worried about teenagers. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his phone capturing video that would later be viewed millions of times across social media platforms. "Look at how hard he's trying," Carlos called out to the crowd. "That horse isn't giving up." He's not going to let his partner down. The teenager's observation struck something deep in the hearts of the watching adults. In a cynical age where loyalty and commitment were often viewed as quaint anachronisms, they were witnessing a demonstration of absolute fidelity that shamed their own capacity for dedication. Thunder's struggle had become a community focal point that transcended every division that normally separated Louisville residents. Conservative business owners stood beside progressive activists. Elderly, long-time residents shared space with young families. And people who had never agreed on anything found themselves united in their concern for the welfare of both horse and officer. Chief Bennett arrived with additional specialized equipment, but even she recognized that traditional rescue operations were limited by the unique nature of the situation. How do you rescue someone who's being rescued by his own partner? She asked Captain O'Brien. It was a question that challenged every protocol in the emergency response handbook, but it also highlighted something remarkable about the bond between police officers and their horses that had never been fully appreciated by department administrators or community critics. Dr. Foster continued to monitor Thunder's condition from her vantage point, providing professional commentary that was increasingly filled with awe rather than clinical detachment. I need to revise everything I thought I knew about horse behavior, she admitted to Chief Bennett. This animal is making decisions that should be beyond his cognitive capabilities. The current had carried Thunder and Jake approximately 6 blocks downstream from their starting point, through an urban landscape that had been transformed into something resembling rapids on a wild river. Street signs, traffic lights, and familiar landmarks were barely visible above the rushing water, creating a surreal environment that challenged everyone's sense of place and normalcy. Thunder's breathing had become labored to the point where each breath was a visible effort, but the horse continued to fight against the current with unwavering determination. His powerful legs worked constantly to maintain position against the flow while supporting Jake's dead weight. Local television news crews were arriving despite the hazardous driving conditions, drawn by reports of the unprecedented rescue attempt. Helicopter coverage was impossible due to the severe weather, but ground crews were documenting what was already being described as one of the most remarkable animal rescue stories in Louisville's history. Marcus Washington faced a personal crisis that extended far beyond his political positions. The community leader who had spent months arguing that the mounted patrol program was an expensive anachronism was watching a demonstration of value that couldn't be measured in budget line items or efficiency metrics. "I was wrong," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the conversations around him. The admission was heard by several people in the crowd, including Sarah Thompson, the school teacher who had previously supported his position. "Wrong about what?" she asked. "About reducing this program to dollars and cents," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving the struggle playing out in the floodwater. "About treating horses like equipment instead of partners." The community leader's public acknowledgement of changing perspective rippled through the crowd like a wave, challenging others to reconsider their own assumptions about the nature of the mounted patrol program. Thunder seemed to sense the emotional investment of the watching crowd. The horse's efforts intensified, as if drawing strength from the collective hope and encouragement of hundreds of people who had united in their concern for his welfare and that of his partner. Mrs. Rodriguez had been joined at street level by her grandson Carlos and many other residents from their apartment building. The elderly woman, who had lived through numerous crises in her 73 years, recognized that she was witnessing something that would be talked about for decades to come. "Mira, Carlos," she said to her grandson, "this is what courage looks like. Not just the horse, but the officer who risked his life to help that woman in the building." Carlos nodded, his teenage skepticism about authority figures completely transformed by what he was observing. "They're both heroes, aren't they, Abuela?" The question was simple, but it captured something profound about the nature of heroism that extended beyond species boundaries and challenged conventional definitions of bravery and selflessness. Dr. Foster was becoming increasingly concerned about Thunder's physical condition, but she was also documenting behavior that would revolutionize understanding of equine intelligence and emotional capacity. This horse is demonstrating problem-solving abilities and emotional intelligence that we've never recorded in domestic animals, she explained to the growing group of officials and media representatives. The storm showed no signs of abating, and meteorologists were reporting that this weather system was unprecedented in both intensity and duration. Flash flood warnings had been extended through the night, with some areas of Jefferson County expected to receive record-breaking rainfall totals. Thunder's struggle against the current had become more than a rescue operation. It had evolved into a symbol of loyalty, dedication, and the extraordinary bonds that could develop between partners who work together toward common goals. The horse's refusal to abandon his injured colleague was challenging everyone's assumptions about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and moral behavior. The crowd had grown to include residents from throughout Louisville, many of whom had never paid attention to the mounted patrol program before this dramatic demonstration of its value. People were sharing umbrellas with strangers, offering coffee and hot soup from thermoses, and creating the kind of community solidarity that typically emerged only during major crises. As Thunder continued his desperate battle against the floodwaters, carrying his unconscious partner toward an uncertain fate, the watching crowd realized they were witnessing something that would change their community forever. The story of Officer Jake Morrison and his horse Thunder was becoming larger than a simple rescue operation. It was becoming a testament to the power of partnership, loyalty, and love that transcended species boundaries. Marcus Washington pulled out his phone, not to record criticism of the mounted patrol program, but to delete the video he had captured earlier for his social media campaign. Some stories, he realized, were too important to be reduced to political talking points. The moment that would define Louisville's understanding of heroism came when Thunder, exhausted beyond any reasonable expectation of continued effort, found reserves of strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical realm. Jake Morrison had been unconscious for nearly 15 minutes when Thunder managed to navigate both of them toward a partially submerged concrete barrier near the Jefferson County Courthouse. The structure, normally used to prevent vehicle access to the courthouse steps, had become an island of stability in the churning floodwater. Dr. Amanda Foster watched with professional amazement as Thunder executed what could only be described as tactical problem-solving. The horse positioned himself against the barrier in a way that allowed the current to help rather than hinder his efforts, using the water's flow to push Jake's body toward the concrete structure. "That's not instinct," she announced to Captain O'Brien and Chief Bennett. "That horse just demonstrated spatial reasoning and strategic thinking. He's using physics to his advantage." The crowd of observers had grown to include people from throughout Jefferson County. Despite the continuing dangerous conditions, news of the dramatic rescue attempt had spread beyond social media and emergency channels, reaching people through the kind of community network that still existed in Kentucky's tight-knit neighborhoods. Thunder's final push against the current required every ounce of strength remaining in his powerful body. The horse's muscles trembled with exhaustion, but his determination never wavered as he managed to get Jake's unconscious form close enough to the concrete barrier for human rescuers to finally intervene. Marcus Washington was among the first to wade into the shallower water near the courthouse steps. The community leader, who had spent months criticizing the mounted patrol program, found himself personally involved in completing the rescue that Thunder had made possible. "Ubi, I've got him," Marcus called out as he grabbed Jake's arms and began pulling the unconscious officer toward safety. Someone help me get him to dry ground. Carlos Rodriguez ignored his grandmother's protests and joined several other community members in assisting with the rescue. The teenager, who had started the day with cynical views about authority figures, was now actively participating in saving the life of a police officer. "Be careful with his head, Doctor," Foster instructed as she waded into the water to provide medical assessment. "He may have sustained injuries when he was swept away, but even as human rescuers took over Jake's care, Thunder's ordeal wasn't finished. The exhausted horse was still fighting against the current, too tired to navigate to safety on his own. The animal who had risked everything to save his partner now needed rescue himself. "That we can't let that horse drown after everything he's done," declared Jennifer Mitchell, voicing what everyone in the crowd was thinking. The business owner, who normally focused on practical matters, was emotionally invested in Thunder's welfare in a way that surprised even herself. Chief Bennett coordinated the second rescue operation, this one focused on getting Thunder to safety. It required additional personnel, specialized equipment, and careful planning to extract an exhausted horse from dangerous floodwater without causing injury to the animal or the rescuers. "Easy, boy." Jake Morrison's voice was weak but audible as he regained consciousness on the courthouse steps. His first words weren't about his own condition or the trauma he had endured. They were about his partner. "Where's Thunder? Is Thunder safe?" The question brought tears to the eyes of people who had witnessed the extraordinary bond between officer and horse. Jake's primary concern, even while recovering from his own near-drowning experience, was for the animal who had risked everything to save him. "And we're getting him now," Chief Bennett assured Jake as emergency medical personnel checked his vital signs. "That horse of yours, he's something special." The rescue operation for Thunder required careful coordination between fire department personnel, Dr. Foster's veterinary expertise, and community volunteers who had been transformed by what they witnessed. The horse was guided toward a ramp area near the courthouse, where the water was shallower and the current less dangerous. Mrs. Rodriguez watched the rescue efforts with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The elderly woman, who had observed the entire drama from her apartment window, was witnessing the conclusion of something that had changed her understanding of courage, loyalty, and community. "Gracias a Dios," she whispered, then corrected herself to English for her grandson's benefit. "Thank God they're both safe." Thunder emerged from the floodwater on unsteady legs, his coat matted and muddy, his breathing labored from exhaustion. But his eyes immediately sought out Jake Morrison, and the horse's relief at seeing his partner alive and conscious was visible to everyone present. The reunion between Jake and Thunder took place on the courthouse steps, with hundreds of Louisville residents serving as witnesses to a bond that had been tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable and had emerged stronger than ever. Jake's hands shook as he examined Thunder for injuries, running his fingers over the horse's legs and body while murmuring words of gratitude and reassurance. "You saved my life, boy," he whispered. "You saved my life." Dr. Foster conducted a thorough veterinary examination, while emergency medical personnel continued their assessment of Jake's condition. Both man and horse had sustained minor injuries and showed signs of exhaustion, but nothing that wouldn't heal with proper care and rest. Marcus Washington approached Jake and Thunder with an expression that reflected the profound change in his perspective. The community leader, who had built his reputation on opposing the Mounted Patrol program, now faced the reality of what that program had accomplished. "Officer Morrison," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion that surprised everyone who knew his usually confident demeanor, "I owe you and your partner an apology. I owe this entire community an apology." The admission was heard by local television crews and hundreds of residents, making it a public acknowledgement that would be remembered long after the floodwaters receded. Marcus Washington's transformation from critic to supporter represented the broader change that had occurred in Louisville's understanding of the Mounted Patrol Program. "You don't owe us anything," Jake replied, though his voice was still weak from his ordeal. "Thunder and I were just doing our job." But everyone present understood that what had occurred went far beyond routine job performance. They had witnessed something that challenged conventional definitions of duty, loyalty, and heroism. Chief Bennett made official statements to the media representatives who had gathered despite the hazardous conditions. "What we witnessed today demonstrates the unique value of our Mounted Patrol Program," she said. "The bond between our officers and their horses creates capabilities that can't be replicated by any technology or conventional equipment." The crowd that had gathered to witness the rescue attempt was beginning to disperse as emergency conditions improved and people returned to dealing with their own flood-related challenges. But the impact of what they had observed would continue to resonate through Louisville's community consciousness for years to come. Carlos Rodriguez stayed behind to help with cleanup efforts, his teenage energy channeled into community service rather than social media and video games. The young man who had started the day with cynical views about authority and community engagement was now actively participating in both. "Abuela was right," he said to Thunder as he helped Dr. Foster monitor the horse's recovery. "Heroes come in all shapes and sizes." Mrs. Rodriguez joined her grandson on the courthouse steps, where she had come to personally thank Jake Morrison and Thunder for their service to the community. The elderly woman, who had lived through numerous hardships in her 73 years, recognized that she had witnessed something extraordinary. "Officer Morrison," she said in her accented but clear English, "you and your horse, you showed us what courage really looks like. Not just today, but every day when you patrol our neighborhoods." The elderly woman's words represented the sentiment of a community that had been transformed by witnessing an extraordinary demonstration of partnership, loyalty, and heroism that transcended species boundaries. As the immediate emergency situation resolved and normal operations began to resume throughout Louisville, the story of Officer Jake Morrison and Thunder was already spreading beyond local boundaries. Social media posts, news reports, and personal accounts were carrying the story to national and international audiences. But for the residents of Louisville, who had witnessed the events firsthand, the impact was more personal and profound. They had seen their community unite around shared values of courage, sacrifice, and mutual support in ways that political campaigns and social programs had never achieved. Dr. Foster completed her veterinary assessment with the professional opinion that Thunder would make a full recovery, though she recommended several days of rest and monitoring. This horse has demonstrated physical capabilities and emotional intelligence that will require us to revise our understanding of equine behavior, she told the assembled officials and media representatives. The transformation in community perspective was perhaps most dramatically represented by Marcus Washington, who used his final interview of the day to announce his intention to become an advocate for expanding rather than reducing the Mounted Patrol Program. "Sometimes you have to witness something extraordinary to understand the true value of what you've been taking for granted," he told the television cameras. Thunder and Officer Morrison have shown us that there are forms of partnership and service that can't be measured in budget spreadsheets. As Thunder and Jake were transported to receive medical care and rest, the crowd of Louisville residents who had witnessed their heroism began to disperse into a city that had been changed by what they had seen. The Mounted Patrol Program that had been facing budget cuts and community criticism was now guaranteed not just survival, but expansion and enhanced support. The story of Officer Jake Morrison and Thunder had become larger than a rescue operation. It had become a testament to the power of loyalty, courage, and partnership that would inspire Louisville for generations to come. 3 months after the flood that transformed Louisville's understanding of heroism, Officer Jake Morrison returned to full duty with the Mounted Patrol Unit. The scar on his left temple served as a permanent reminder of that dramatic Tuesday morning, but more importantly, it represented the beginning of a new chapter in his community's relationship with law enforcement. Thunder had made a complete physical recovery, though Dr. Amanda Foster continued to monitor both his health and behavior for signs of post-traumatic stress. What she discovered instead was a horse that seemed more confident and connected to his work than ever before, as if the experience had deepened his understanding of his role in the community. "It's remarkable," Dr. Foster explained during one of Thunder's routine checkups. Most animals would show lasting anxiety after such trauma, but Thunder appears to have gained confidence from successfully protecting his partner. He's demonstrating even stronger problem-solving abilities than before the incident. The Mounted Patrol Unit had not only survived the budget debates that had threatened its existence, but had been expanded to include 2 additional horse and officer teams. The Louisville Metro Council had unanimously approved increased funding after witnessing the unique capabilities demonstrated during the flood emergency. Marcus Washington had become the program's most vocal advocate, a transformation that surprised no one more than Marcus himself. The community leader who had built his reputation opposing the Mounted Patrol now used his influence to promote understanding of the program's value throughout Kentucky and neighboring states. I learned something profound that day about the difference between being right in theory and being right in practice, Marcus explained to a gathering of municipal leaders from across the region. Sometimes, the most important capabilities can't be measured by conventional metrics. His advocacy had led to speaking engagements throughout the Ohio Valley, where other communities were examining their own emergency response capabilities and considering the role that mounted patrol units might play in their public safety strategies. Carlos Rodriguez had channeled his experience into a community service project that connected local teenagers with police horses through educational programs and volunteer opportunities. The cynical 17-year-old had evolved into a bridge between his generation and law enforcement, helping both sides understand each other better. Before that day, I thought police horses were just for parades and tourist photos, Carlos explained to a group of his peers during one of the educational sessions. But Thunder showed me that partnerships between humans and animals can accomplish things that technology can't replicate. Mrs. Rodriguez had become something of a neighborhood celebrity, frequently sharing her eyewitness account with visitors and new residents who wanted to understand the community's history. At 73, she had lived through enough changes to appreciate when something truly significant had occurred. "People ask me, what was so special about that day?" she would tell her audiences. "It wasn't just the rescue, though that was miraculous. It was watching our community discover what we're capable of when we unite around shared values instead of fighting over our differences." Her apartment window, which had provided the perfect vantage point for observing the dramatic rescue, had become a local landmark of sorts, with visitors often asking to see the view from which she had witnessed history. Jennifer Mitchell had expanded her business to include a small museum display about the flood and rescue, featuring photographs, video footage, and artifacts from that dramatic day. The business owner, who had initially viewed the Mounted Patrol program through a purely economic lens, now understood its cultural and social value to the community. "The tourism impact has been significant," she acknowledged. "But that's not the real benefit. The real benefit is how this story has changed our community's sense of itself and what we're capable of achieving together." Chief of Police Sarah Bennett had used the dramatic rescue as a case study for law enforcement agencies throughout the region, demonstrating how animal-human partnerships could enhance emergency response capabilities in ways that conventional training had never anticipated. The Jake Morrison and Thunder incident has revolutionized our thinking about the role of mounted patrol units, Chief Bennett explained to a conference of police administrators. We've moved beyond thinking of horses as ceremonial or crowd control resources to understanding them as intelligent partners capable of independent decision-making in crisis situations. The story had attracted national attention, with documentaries, magazine articles, and academic studies examining the implications of Thunder's behavior for understanding animal intelligence and the potential applications for emergency response services. Dr. Foster had been invited to present her findings about Thunder's cognitive abilities to veterinary conferences and animal behavior research symposiums throughout North America. Her documentation of the horse's strategic problem-solving during the rescue had contributed to evolving scientific understanding of equine intelligence. Thunder's actions during the flood challenged our assumptions about the cognitive limitations of domestic animals, she explained to her professional colleagues. His ability to assess a complex situation and develop an effective response strategy suggests that we need to completely reconsider how we think about human-animal partnerships in high-stress environments. Jake Morrison had received numerous awards and recognition for his service during the flood, but he consistently redirected attention to Thunder and to the community members who had assisted with the rescue. The police officer, who had always been modest about his work, became even more humble after experiencing the power of community support during his darkest moment. Heroes don't work alone, he would tell audiences during the speaking engagements that had become part of his expanded community outreach responsibilities. No, what happened that day was only possible because an entire neighborhood came together to support each other. Thunder and I were just one part of that larger effort. The bond between Jake and Thunder had become stronger than ever, noticed by everyone who observed them working together. Their partnership had evolved beyond the typical relationship between police officer and service animal to something that challenged conventional understanding of interspecies cooperation. Thunder seemed to understand his celebrity status, accepting attention from visitors and media representatives with the dignified patience that had always characterized his personality. But those who knew him best could see that his primary focus remained on his work and his partnership with Jake. The Mounted Patrol Unit's expanded role in Louisville's emergency response planning had inspired similar programs throughout Kentucky and neighboring states. Communities that had never considered mounted patrol units were now examining how horse and officer teams might enhance their public safety capabilities. Marcus Washington's transformation from critic to advocate had become a model for how community leaders could change their positions when presented with new evidence and perspectives. His willingness to publicly acknowledge his change in thinking had enhanced rather than damaged his credibility as a community voice. The leadership sometimes requires the courage to admit when you've been wrong, he explained to a group of emerging community leaders. The day I watched Thunder risk his life to save Officer Morrison, I realized that my opposition to the Mounted Patrol program was based on incomplete understanding of its true value. The anniversary of the flood and rescue had become an unofficial community holiday, with residents gathering annually at the courthouse steps where the dramatic conclusion had taken place. The event featured educational presentations about emergency preparedness, recognition of first responders, and celebration of the community bonds that had been strengthened during the crisis. Carlos Rodriguez usually provided the closing remarks at these anniversary gatherings, sharing his perspective as someone whose life had been changed by witnessing extraordinary courage and dedication. His transformation from cynical teenager to community advocate represented the broader change that had occurred throughout Louisville. That day taught me that heroism isn't just about individual actions, he would tell the assembled crowds. It's about communities that support and celebrate the courage of those who serve and protect us. Thunder and Officer Morrison were heroes, but so were all of you who came together to support them. As the sun set over Louisville on another peaceful evening, Jake Morrison and Thunder concluded their patrol shift with the same dedication and professionalism they had always brought to their work. But now, they served a community that understood and appreciated the unique value of their partnership in ways that had never existed before that transformative Tuesday morning. The story of Officer Jake Morrison and Thunder had become more than a dramatic rescue. It had become a testament to the power of loyalty, courage, and community unity that continued to inspire Louisville residents and visitors from around the world. Their partnership represented the best of what could be achieved when different species work together toward common goals, demonstrating that heroism comes in many forms and that the bonds between partners can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. The mounted patrol unit that had once faced budget cuts and community criticism now stood as a symbol of Louisville's commitment to innovative public safety approaches that honored both tradition and effectiveness. Jake and Thunder's legacy would continue to influence law enforcement and community relations for generations to come. Dear readers, we hope that the story of Jake Morrison and Thunder has moved you as deeply as it moved the people of Louisville that unforgettable day. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories of courage, loyalty, and transformation. You can find it by clicking to your left. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of partnership, and the extraordinary courage that exists in ordinary people and their animal companions. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we look forward to seeing your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of heroism and hope.